Welcome back, everybody. We've got another great podcast. This one is going to be a little bit different than you're probably used to. We've started to bring in some wonderful guests for Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit. We've got Phil and Clint here with A-TACS. Great group of guys down here. We're in the lovely South Georgia near Columbus, hanging out. Of course, Matt's here with me. And so we got some guests here. It's going to be a little bit different than what you're probably used to hearing on our podcast. Also, make sure you tune in for the YouTube video. Some of you guys are watching on YouTube right now. Some of you are listening, on the podcast form. But thanks for tuning in, and we're going to get cracking into this. And today, the primary subject is going to be camouflage, all right? And if you guys don't know, that's what A-TACS is known for as a brand and everything, is making great camo. And I myself have been a fan of the A-TACS FG, and that's what prompted us to come down here and have a chat with these guys. So introduce yourselves, and let's talk a little bit about this and get things rolling a bit.
Hi, Eric. I'm Clint. A-TACS Camo.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Phil. I'm also A-TACS Camo and the other part of the company.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
And how long have you guys been making camo?
Oh my God, yeah. I've been designing camo for probably the last 20 years. So, old timer in the camo field, probably 20 plus years now.
That's right.
So I started out in the outdoor market, worked at Realtree for a number of years, developed patterns with them, and then went out all around 2002, 2003, and started figuring out what was next from there. So started a hunting brand called Next Camo. It was very traditional, leaf lemon stick type camo. I guess what would be considered to be more old school camo now in the hunting market. And then a few years after that, we watched a big paradigm shift in the tactical industry. This was right about the inception of multicam and near the end of UCP in its run. Vastly popular pattern.
Right.
Everybody loved UCP. And that, as that sort of tapered down, A-TACS was just our answer to the other two power players, I guess, that were out there at the time. So, I think multicam came in and they had it's a great pattern, and their philosophy behind it was one pattern for all situations, all environments at that time. And, there are different doctrines in camo, so I don't, necessarily subscribe to the fact that one pattern fits everywhere. And, you guys who've all worn it know that's not the case always. When it works great. But, if you're in a desert environment, you need a desert pattern. So the original A-TACS pattern, it took a while to conceive, but around 2009 we introduced that pattern and got off to a strong start. And kind of the rest is history, I guess. From there, we've been rocking along ever since. We're the fly beneath the radar camo company, I guess. A lot of people still don't even know we exist. So
that's what's so crazy about, I run into a lot of folks that, like for instance, when they saw my seat covers in my truck, they're like, what camo is that? They're like, what is that, out of focus watermelon, or what in the heck is that camo color? But when I would approach people like out in the field, if I'm out in a hunting situation, a hunting camp or whatever, I have so many questions from people. They're like, what in the world is this camo? They thought it was so cool, right?
Yeah.
And I just went through this kind of weird selection process. Like, I got to the point where a lot of my old hunting stuff was just getting worn out and faded and been washed too many times and that sort of thing. And I got to a point where I'm like, all right, I was just going to compare all these camos.
right.
And the FG just hopped out at me. And I don't know if it was like the Star Wars fan in me looking at like, the moon base of Endor and like the way that, on the Ewok moon, like the way that, seriously, the way the rebels dressed, it looks like A-TACS.
Right.
It's just the funniest thing. And I always thought it was such a cool camo. So there's part of that pop culture reason that it appealed to me. But then after I actually got some samples and started playing with it, I really began to like it a lot. And it's weird, until recently I didn't even know that you stopped doing the FG and the AU, as a color.
Right. Yeah, that was definitely something when we talked on the phone, which is surprising, but we've tried to kind of bring along a lot of the A-TACS users with us, as one of the things that, most guys that go to SHOT Show or go to any of the industry conferences, every company out there is after the new thing, the new widget, the new device, but camo companies, on the other hand, seem to be the one thing that nobody wants them to change, And so we had a lot of A-TACS users and certainly a lot of FG users that when Phil and I started talking about evolving the camo a little bit and kind of moving into the future. Okay, you've got this, 8+ year camo or more, and it's time to refresh it, kind of do something new, but take an already advanced camo and try to make it better. And that was one of the things, and some of the message that we've tried to get out was even with the AUX, those are the same colors. They're slightly horizontal to kind of go with that IX pattern that we were doing, and the same thing with FG. We wanted FG to become a little bit more of a true tropical pattern, but again, for all those guys that had bought FG in the past to look at FGX and say, wow, this pattern is just as effective and advanced. And I'll tell you what, I think that as a group of patterns, and that's one thing I think Phil does amazingly, is the marketing background is not only designing the camos themselves, it's coming up with the entire idea of around the marketing, the logos, the names of each one of the patterns, how they evolve from the original patterns into the new ones. So because these things have a shelf life, that everything does. Something new is going to come out and it's going to evolve. So you got to kind of stay ahead of that, and keep evolving as a company. Everybody has to do that a little bit.
100%.
Yeah, and I think a large part of what you guys are doing does stem from your experience in the military. A lot of people don't want that change because they are skeptical of how well it performs. So when you start looking at experiences from like the Air Force and their Tiger Stripe and the Navy and all these failed camouflage patterns that were supposedly supposed to do well, really tested poorly, but kind of somehow got pushed through. But with your experience in particular about being a war fighter, you really kind of bring that and you mix it with the science of pattern making, and it makes this sweet harmony of functional tactical patterns.
Yeah.
And that's what I've seen so far.
That's a great point, Matt. And the thing is you guys' experience as well. We all get around each other. We start talking about camo patterns immediately. You say ACU and everybody just recoils and horrible pattern. But these things have evolved along from OG 107 green to woodland, and the types of fabrics, ripstops and heavyweights. And this is experience that we have that we bring to a company that's trying to provide something to the warfighter that is evolving. Hybrid fabrics and things that, moisture wicking and bug repelling and odor defeating. There's a lot of hybrid things out there, and to evolve along the industry, you have to kind of stay thermal. Thermal's another one.
That's a big one.
Yeah, offline, that was a discussion that we were having before, is that, I was out at Ox Ranch hanging out with the guys at Paradigm SRP, and they've got some pretty interesting technology, among which are thermals that can actually even distinguish facial characteristics all the way out to I think he was saying up to 1,700 meters. And that was just the technology that was available at the time, and that was 2 years ago. So it's camo is very different than concealment. And it's how do you really, you know what I mean? Thermal doesn't really hide anything. So with the new technology, there's certainly, it's getting harder to hide, I guess.
Yeah.
And you look at what the Chinese are doing. Chinese have actually developed, active camouflage techniques that use fiber optics that, take the light from the other side of you and transfer it to the front, and all of a sudden you're blending in with whatever you're standing in front of.
Correct.
Which is amazing, and it's a great point. It's like you're teaching a private for the first time. This is cover, this is concealment.
Right.
Okay, get it right, smack. And making them understand that. And as we evolve military-wise in camo, I hate to say it, but for me, when you start seeing, over 40 countries wearing the same camo pattern, it's good, but there used to be a time that countries were identified, conventional forces were identified by their uniform. We knew what this country looked like. We knew what that country looked like. And I tell you what, if I wanted to go into conspiracy things and you start looking at the global police force, when you got all the soft and tier 1 assets wearing the same thing, same products, you want to start kind of setting yourself apart. And we've seen that in the soft community here in the US, is guys are starting to say, hey, you know, I want to be able to PID my guy on an objective, because now the only difference is between products and camo is a flag. You know? And you start seeing that when you get a lot of coalition forces together, everybody's dressed the same.
Yeah.
And we also know that a lot of the changes that occur at those levels and the sort of learning experiences and changes in SOP that develop from a military perspective start in those types of units, right?
Correct.
So something that may take a widespread change from a military unit might start there. It's always the SF guys and the Rangers and the Special Forces and all of that tier of soldier and airmen or whatever, that they all do their thing, and then the rest of the military goes, okay, that's what these guys are doing, that's what we're going to do. So that always sets a sort of course for what the rest of the military does in the future.
It does. And I mean, like I said, I mean, you get a really good product out there in certain units, somebody starts using it and it just, whew, the bell curve on it's pretty long. But again, that was one of the things that we wanted to do. When you see other patterns in such wide use, you know, you start going, hey, what's coming next? You know, who would ever thought, you know, we go through this much evolution in the Department of Defense and, you know, the Air Force, what is it? I can't even think of ABU, Air Force.
Battle uniform, or,
yeah.
You know, the ACU, the Air Force, the Navy, and it seems like that was like watching somebody fall down a flight of stairs. It just kept getting worse. You know, It was like ACU came out, and then the Air Force came out with tiger stripe, you know, Air Force camo, and then blue camouflage for the Navy. I mean, who would ever thought?
I think
You know?
I think the Marine Corps was really the only ones that did it right. They did, you know,
They did.
they did a desert uniform, they did a forest uniform.
Yes.
And honestly, it was a good uniform. It worked. It did its job, and I think that rolls into you were able to identify those forces on the battlefield.
That's right.
We did a lot of cross training. We worked with the Canadian military at one point. We worked with like the 3rd MU, and it was very easy to identify, even
Yep.
at that time, what forces were what.
Yep.
And then when you start getting everybody mixed together, you're just like, whoa, who's who?
I couldn't agree more on that. The MARPAT stuff was a
Yep.
great idea. Both the desert and the woodland with a coyote, you know, set of tactical gear or whatever. That they really thought that out, and I think that was really the best solution for all branches of the U.S. service. They had it nailed.
Yep.
And unfortunately, there's also a lot of bureaucracy that goes into how these things are handled. You know, it's always a bureaucrat, it's always a politician. It's never a man on the ground that gets to decide, well, hey, I'm the guy getting shot at every day. What do I want to use? So nobody cares about what we need out in the field. It's always some bureaucrat that decides. I mean, like the whole fiasco over the M16 in its entirety from the beginning,
Yes.
right? Like the M4 is a proven platform, and we've worked out the bugs. But over the years, you know, yeah, the M16 pattern was not without its share of difficulty, and a lot of that came from bureaucrats.
Yeah, and I mean, when the cries get loud enough, you know, and the end user starts speaking up, because there's no doubt that amidst in, you know, the Afghanistan conflict, when guys knew, hey, we're getting shot at because of this camo pattern, as we talked about before. You know, you're talking about manufacturing problems. The crotches were blowing out. It was washing out real quick. The fabric was not real good performance. UV problems, so the color was fading away. They were really bad, and it got to the level that it was like, fix it now.
Well, you need the commercial market out there anyway. I think most of the advances in a lot of this stuff has come from the commercial market.
That's
and
true.
It slid into the SOF units and special operations, and then it's worked its way through the system.
Yeah.
So,
I couldn't agree more. I think that the biggest innovation in the beginning were the battle shirts, just being able to not have your whole BDU top Under the Armour, and that came from the private sector. That was one of those like, hey, we need to create a solution to this problem. And I think like the very first place I saw one of those at was like Ranger Joe's in the catalog, like way back, back in like '06, I think it was.
I think were those the first ones that come out? Massif.
Yeah, it was
the combat shirts that came out originally.
And I was like, man, that's such a great idea. I wish they would have had that a year ago, because I could have really used that.
Just missed it.
Yeah, just missed it.
Yeah, Phil, earlier you were mentioning the commercial market, and I agree. I think that the commercial world is a really good litmus test for innovation, because the commercial consumers, your average consumer, is a really tough person to please, right? People like hunters know what they want, and they tend to be like really, really stringent about what they want, because they get out in the field and they see what works and what doesn't. So it would seem that it would only seem natural that would occur.
You're right. I mean, and also, competition. There's a lot more competition in the commercial market, and that competition fosters innovation, right? People are always trying to out-innovate each other, and we exist in that world. I mean, the end user is the one that benefits from that ultimately. So.
Right, and they're on the civilian side, there's a certain expectation that they have, because they're paying money for it. So on the military side, when you get issued something, it's kind of just like, hey, it is what it is. I'm going to use it. It was issued, and then you still have the choice to go buy better gear, because everybody does it. You go and you buy better gear.
That's right.
But on the civilian market, that's your choice from the beginning. So when you go and invest, $300 for a piece of gear, you expect it to perform to a certain standard, and when it doesn't, they cry the loudest, because they're like, man, I just bought this $300 plate carrier, and it's not worth a crap. Like it falls apart, or it's defective. It doesn't hold the plate at the right angle, and it's cutting into my back, or it's all different types of things they run into, and that's really, I think, what helps grow the industry as a whole, is that you have that competition of like, well, what can I do to reduce my defect rate, or what can I do to create a better product, because they are paying an obscene amount of money for these products.
Well, or you've got a guy that's going on a $55,000 elk hunt,
Yep.
and you better believe that if he feels like that hunt was blown due to the camo,
Oh, boy.
he's going to be upset, right?
true.
So there is a certain fiscal motivation that hunters have, because let's face it, some of these hunts are expensive, right?
Oh yeah.
And that's a very viable way to, as a litmus test, to know how good your pattern's doing. If you've got the guys that are going out on expensive hunts and they're buying your camo, chances are you're doing the right thing.
Plus, I mean, we do a lot of work with Browning. We've got a couple of A-TACS patterns or custom patterns that we do in partnership with Browning, and I mean, there are a plethora of guys out there that are field testers. That's all they do. Before anything hits the market, they're out there in the mountains scuffing it up, and everything gets evaluated and tested the same way it does in the military. So we take all of that stuff into consideration with everything we do. So it's kind of like in the early days, when we started A-TACS, and like a lot of companies, we're figuring things out. So some of the fabric, that we had in the beginning, had some fading issues. There were some quality issues and some things that we had when we came out of the gate. And we, of course, rolled up our sleeves, when all that stuff happened, and started the hardcore rigorous testing and, figuring it out, because we wanted to make the end product better. We wanted the best hand, the most color fastness, the least fading of anybody on the market. So, and that's why, we test everything now that we do, because we got to stay competitive with everybody else that's out there.
Well, I think those are growing pains that, a lot of young companies go through, and everybody experiences that, and even, Ballistic Ink has had some issues that we had to work out. So we've all felt it, and it's just a normal experience. But the great thing is that you saw it and you addressed it and you corrected it, and you have a plan moving forward to do what you need to do.
Yeah, we've definitely spent, when we spend a lot of time at SHOT Show and we're talking to buyers, end users, whether they're military, law enforcement, it's almost, it's a recipe. There's ingredients to this stuff. A lot of guys, they'll see a name or a brand and they say, hey, A-TACS, and then there's all these steps in here between. that end product that they're buying, you know, and then you see that somewhere in that chain that there was some kind of a problem. I'll give you a prime example. The United States is basically, most everybody knows, we've been decimated when it comes to fabric manufacturing and printing. So, you know, there's a lot of battle cry out there for made in the USA. Hey, it's got to be, you know, Berry, mil spec this, mil spec that. Yes, okay. We would love to be able to go out and have 30 different companies to be able to hand select from, to be able to go print and manufacture stuff here in the United States. But the reality is there is a very small number of factories in the United States that prints mil-spec fabrics. I mean, you're talking one hand, very few amount of companies that do that. So if there's any problems in there, or people that are putting their hands on this stuff, these are quality control things that a company has to stay on top of all the time to make sure everything from the gray goods, the greige that's moving to a factory and being printed, that quality inks and fabrics are being used and things are staying on standard. It is one heck of a juggling act. And me starting to work with Phil here at A-TACS was, you know, I was an end user. I can walk on azimuth in the woods and, you know, set up a patrol base. I know all that stuff. But when it came to how do you make this product come to exist and how do you do it at the standard that professionals want? You know, that's a great thing to understand both sides of it. You understand what they need and understand how you got to get there and produce a product that somebody's going to go, wow, I've had this pair of pants 8 years and it's had less than a couple of % of degradation on the color. Nice. You know, UV, you know, color fast, light fast, soft hand to fabric. You know, there's a lot of things that are coming out with new fabrics now, even Nyko Extreme, 50/50s, things like that, that, you know, now everybody, you put a pair of pants together and there's 3-4 different substrates in that one pair of pants. You got 500D on it, you got ripstop, you got Nyko, you got 2-way, 4-way stretch. It's a lot of stuff to keep up with and to make sure it all is firing on all cylinders and you're getting everything on standard.
And that goes to the tech end too, because I mean, you know, you don't really think about it when you look at a backpack or you look at any surface that's camouflaged or concealed, you know, whether it's rubber, plastic, or whatever.
Right.
All these new technologies that are coming out, and they're you know, front edge technologies, they have to be applicable to all of these different surface areas for them to work. You know, firearms is a big thing too. I mean, with thermals, you know, what do you do there? Right. You know, you're carrying around a hot gun. I mean, you can have on a thermal mitigation suit all day long, but how are you going to thermal the weapon? What are you going to do to shield that?
There's only so much you can do. I mean,
that's at the end of the day, that's the reality of it. So, you know, you can innovate and innovate and innovate. You know, we're actually working on thermal solutions now for a lot of our stuff. So, you know, we'll call it like a triple threat.
Yeah. You know, it's crazy how camo has really come a long way from the advent of organized soldiers on the battlefield. I mean, we look at, you know, all of the conflicts that have happened on this continent anyway, and you look at, like, early on, the Redcoats, right?
Right.
I mean, they were known, like you mentioned earlier, you know, being able to identify your troops. Well, there was no better identification than seeing a guy in a red wool coat. I mean, yeah, a red coat. I mean, that doesn't get any more, hey, here I am. And a lot of their accoutrements and things were white, white leather. So, you know, that, I mean,
brass buttons.
Yeah, brass and white and red. And I mean, that's the last thing that I would want to be going to war with, you know. And Patrick Ferguson early on, when he has an experimental rifle corps of 100 men that came to our continent to fight against us in the Revolution, you know, he was one of the first guys to say, hey, we're hunters, right? We're going to brown and green. And that was like one of the first concepts, I believe, where a military officer on the British side of the conflict finally was like, hey, you know, we need to hide.
Maybe red's not the right
maybe red
color.
is not a good idea, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a new thing for people to want to conceal themselves on the battlefield. I mean, when you combine the advancements in camouflage and everything like that, but then you add that to the advent of smokeless powder, that was a game changer too, because you could be well concealed on the battlefield, but you lie on the prone and fire a shot from a black powder rifle, they're going to know exactly where you are.
Exactly.
So when you added smokeless powder to the equation, then you really had a recipe where soldiers could hide on the battlefield in a, really conceal themselves quite well.
Kind of started there.
Yeah, and just to touch on when you said that the whole thermal technology and how, I know we were having a conversation previously about where it's going to go in the future. Do you even really need camouflage with the way that technology is going, with the thermal imaging technology that's out there, with the drone technology? And from a warfighter point of view, someone that's on the ground, it does give you a sense of security. You're not really too concerned at that time about the drones. What you're worried about is the guy that's in front of you. Is he able to get a quick target acquisition on you? If it's able to give you just a little bit more time, seconds or minutes, and that really can turn the tide. And that's really what I would focus on. It's like, yes, you still need camouflage, regardless of where technology is going. In the heat of the moment on the battlefield, it's very, very pertinent.
You're never going to be able to replace Joe Blow on the ground.
No,
absolutely.
Never
Like A-TACS early, or not A-TACS, but ACUs early on, I found that they tended to work best. We were the first unit to be issued ACU uniforms. And those early ones, like you said, the material were crap. They were crap. You would bend too far and they'd rip right out.
Right.
But what we found is that the camo looked better and worked better when it was good and dirty.
Yes.
The dirtier you got, the more it broke those lines up, and
Exactly.
it was more effective camouflage. But that's only because it didn't look like ACU anymore, because it wasn't. It was ACU with dirt all over it.
It was like a gray,
and that's
dark
where,
gray ACU.
you just look like a blob at distance, and we're like, wow, okay, now we're really thinking here, Getting dirty, that's what it took.
I'll pose
it's
a
all
question.
about.
I'll pose a question to you on one aspect though, and I felt this way when we first went to ACUs. We talked a little bit about our Ghost LE pattern, our law enforcement pattern, when we were looking at it before we got here on the podcast or whatever. There's certain psychological aspects to how a soldier looks, how they feel themselves. How did you feel the first time you started wearing ACU uniforms and you realized this doesn't look like camo?
Right.
When you looked at another soldier and you looked at their camo and their equipment and you said, wow, soft, let's take them.
Target.
Hey, look at that multicam, look at that, and look at what we're wearing. What is the psychological value, not only in the concealment, but for how the soldier perceives
mindset.
themselves? It's the same thing with law enforcement. One of the reasons why early on the special operations SWAT teams, SRT, went to black was it was psychologically dominant. When you see a bunch of figures cloaked in black kicking in a door coming at you, you immediately get that Grim Reaper, Darth Vader, whatever you want to call it. It's a shock value.
Right.
It's a way you perceive yourself, in uniform. And I'll tell you, the entire time that the Army was in ACU, I couldn't even wait to get that thing off. It was horrible.
Right.
It just didn't make a soldier feel like a soldier because it didn't look like camo. To me, that's a personal opinion. But
It didn't, but being one of the first units to have those and go in country with them, the shock value was there for the enemy. Because I remember specifically after like the first 2 days, they started calling us. They didn't know it was the first time they had ever seen it.
They didn't know who we were.
They nicknamed us Shadow Warriors because that was like the best. That was the best nickname they could come up with because it was the first time they had ever seen that camo.
They thought that we were some elite anti-terrorist hunting unit or something like that.
Because the first few missions we ran we were rotating out the 3rd ACR, I believe it was. Then they were in DCUs. And they were rotating out, and even they treated us different because they had never seen us. So they're looking at us like, who are these guys? These guys are in this new camo pattern we've never seen before, and we're in these DCUs. Who are they? And then you could just tell there was already a difference between, even within the same unit. They're like, who are these guys?
And that is the psychological value.
Yeah.
And wherever that ACU fell in that,
Right.
there's a big difference, as I remember at the time in Afghanistan, there was a couple of lieutenants that came back from over in Afghanistan, and I hope I get the story at least close to right. One of their fathers was I can't remember which senator he was, but they came back and said, this uniform is really, really bad, and we need to look at getting something that's going to work better for this environment that we're in. And this is not working, and it's really putting us at a disadvantage. And that was when we went through the whole process of them saying, hey, we already developed. When the Army went to the industry again for the innovation, said not only do we want to change the cut of the uniform, we want to go ahead and solicit and change the camo pattern as we change the functionality of the uniform. So we went through that whole process. I'm sure you guys probably remember, at least during this process, they basically went to industry and it started up a lot of camo companies. Hey, we're gonna put a camo together and we're gonna go in on this new camo that the Army's looking for. Army Times had like 8 or 12 patterns on there, and they went through this process of trying to eliminate, hey, this one's gone. And I remember there was some Marpats in there, and I think Cryptek was in there, and, at least Multicam was called something else, but it was kind of, I think it was another designation.
Yep.
But man, when they went to the industry, that just, boom, it just started all these camo companies.
And rightly so. I mean, because when you start screaming military contract, I mean, that's a big
Everybody
deal.
has their hands out. They're like, hey,
Oh my
pick
gosh.
me, pick
Oh, yeah.
me.
Yeah, and that was an evolution they went through. It went from like, I don't know, I think it was 8 patterns in total down to like 5, and then it was down to the last 3. And, so then it ended up shaking out the way that it did, and we ended up getting into ACU, which didn't last. I mean, it lasted a while, but again, like you said, and I couldn't agree, sweaty, bloody, muddy, just about, I mean, green works pretty good. Look at the Israelis.
Right.
They've been wearing green for many, many, many years, and
Yeah.
I still haven't seen them even look at a camouflage pattern. I'm like, we're fine.
Well, you take an Israeli soldier in all OD green and throw him in the desert and roll him around and get him dusty.
Yep.
Well, there you go. Now you're dusty.
That's right.
Now you
There you
match.
go.
Yeah,
You
That's
know,
right.
and
That's
so
exactly right.
I mean, you get like you said, sweaty and muddy and nasty, and especially 2 weeks of no shower, and that's got a certain look to it.
Yeah,
a certain smell too.
Oh yeah.
it definitely gets into some of the areas, and I want to say, I hate the term tactical, but I mean, it does get to a point where you're looking at, small units wearing a certain thing, its functionality, and like you mentioned, Matt, I mean, just that split second of being able to, is that our guy or somebody else's guy, just to throw you off enough to where you got a PID, a target, that may be just enough time that you need with a good camouflage pattern, minus thermal and all the other things that are starting to come into play, which thermal is becoming a big deal. And, we are really, I mean, from everything from a guy sleeping under a sleep shelter, if you've got aerial UAV capabilities with thermal, and these thermals, we've been out here to Fort Benning, and we've looked at really good thermals, some that are okay, some that mount to a soldier's rifle, and some of the thermal fabrics and stuff that are out there perform differently depending on the degree of quality of that thermal. So that's definitely something that we've been working on with some other companies, and there's a lot of other guys out there trying to do it right now. And it does get to the point, and we talked about this, it's like, wow, I mean, how much do you really need camo? But there are reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that if you're going to be, say, in a hide and you're in Overwatch, and they have I've seen like some really cool technology where they have like little screens and they're throwing them over, and they can stay masked in there. Definitely has its uses. But as just a regular like ground force, not SOF, like nothing, just a regular ground force going in, you really don't have the time to deploy those type of assets. You're just kind of ground and pound, hit them, and you're moving. It's a very, very fluid battlefield. But I just wanted to go back to you saying that they changed the cut on the uniforms. That's huge, mainly because fashion, even in the military camouflage game, is huge. You will never find like those super cool tactical operator pictures in ACUs. And that's because the cut was just so bad. It was like, I mean, they put zero thought into.
They did not factor in the movement of the human body in extreme positions
it's
at
so
all.
bad. I mean, our supply had to. They basically
come
had
on,
like
it
500
had
pairs of
bungee
pants.
cords on the pockets,
Yes,
man.
everywhere. I mean,
so cruel.
it was terrible. But now, honestly, when you look at the camouflage is being put into service now, everything looks tailored. I mean, you're getting a top that's already pre-tailored. It comes in on the waist. It looks good, and that's really what's kind of selling that product.
Well, you're right, and I mean, we all know this. Anybody that's carried a big green tick around long enough, ounces make pounds, that favorite term, you know. I mean, if you can make it fit better, wear better, moisture wicking, I mean, that is the evolution that we're talking about in the industry, is people trying to come out with that new thing. And I mean,
uniform.
yeah, you cut a uniform, but again, A-TACS, that was one of the things that we wanted to do that a lot of other guys out there may or may not have done yet, is evolve the patterns and try to make them better. You know, we don't want to just, hey, this is it. As soon as this wears out, let's just shut off the lights and go home. You know, we're done. You know, this ran as long as it's going to run. That was one of the things that we really wanted to do with A-TACS. What is the next? What are we doing next?
Right.
And let me tell you, we've got other things that we're doing, you know, so there's bunches of things that we're looking at right now to include thermal fabrics, performance fabrics, patterns, things like that. So still more stuff to come.
Good deal.
Lots of things on the horizon.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. And it is important, you know, that a company constantly innovate. And I thought it was really cool that, you know, you guys reached out to me about wanting to do a podcast with us, because I've used the A-TACS FG for a long time. I actually had some seat covers made for my truck. I recently traded in my truck, and I had some FG A-TACS seat covers. And all of my Instagram posts, people would make jokes, and they're like, "Oh, you look like you're sitting on a watermelon." Like they thought that the A-TACS FG looked like a watermelon, and I thought that was so funny, and everything like that. But it's a good camo pattern. I like it, and I do have a set of the AUs as well, which I couldn't make up my mind which one I like more, so I ordered a set of each for hunting, and I have hunted with the AUs and the FGs, but I find myself for Georgia going towards the FGs. So let's get into a little bit of the new camo pattern. So so FG and AU is no more. What's the mainstay for A-TACS moving forward with the new patterns?
Our centerpiece to the line is still the A-TACS IX, right? That's the intermediate extreme pattern. So that's our middle bridge piece of the puzzle. So that's for variable operational environments, transitional terrain, all that kind of good stuff. Of course, we got the new version of AU, which just echoes IX just a little bit. So it's a little bit more horizontal, but same colors as original AU. The idea that we had when we came out with this new line of patterns, the reason we refreshed the entire lineup, all the patterns at once, is because we wanted to be able to mix and match the patterns. Because when guys typically deploy in the field, I mean, you're going to have variable terrain, so there's a furtherance to the way camo works. You don't necessarily have to, you know, stay in that mindset that I've got to be match from head to toe. Because it also gives you a larger block of distortion or breakup if you're green on the top and tan on the bottom, or vice versa, depending on your environment.
Yeah, people aren't going to look and see a human-shaped blob. They may not know exactly what they're looking at, but they're not going to associate that with the shape of a human.
Exactly.
That's amazing you say that, and Phil will jump back in here on it. That is one of the things that when you look back, just as you go all the way back to the red coats you were talking about, you look back at least soft units, Vietnam, 5th Group, LURS, SEALs, things like that. You see a lot of guys changing up the camo. They don't care. They're going to throw on the clean pair of pants. They don't care if this one washed different than this. They don't even care that the patterns are different. You know, hey, I like this pair of pants. I like this top. And when I get out there, you know, it's still a human shape. If you have it in the same pattern, color, whatever, you can still identify that a little bit. Really, the X line, when we went into started really talking about what we wanted in the X line of patterns, was it to be modular. Modular was a big thing that the Army was talking about. Not only does AUX, FGX, IX, Ghost, they are standalone patterns that any company can buy all the substrates and build an entire outfit or gear equipment out of that pattern. But you go up in altitude, the pine trees are green, the ground is rock, you change it up. AU on the bottom, FG on the top, and the IX is a 50-50 blend of both of those two patterns. So it was meant to be modular, and that was a lot of the thought process of how do we take camo to the next level for the individual soldier, break up the camo on the guy.
We like to go against the grain too. I mean, it's
Yeah.
become kind of a thing where, like I said, guys got to feel like they've been trained to be matchy match.
Yeah,
from head
that's
to toe.
true.
And-
Uniformity is probably important in garrison, but in
Yes.
combat, you don't want uniformity. You want chaos, right? Camo is chaos because you don't want lines. You want unpredictability. If a
point.
customer bought, let's say, A-TACS FG or AU, and they're already an existing customer, and they'll say they got a set of AU bottoms or FG bottoms, and then they buy one of your new camo patterns, they can integrate that in with their existing FG or AU, no problem, because the colors are the same. Like you guys were mentioning that on the XI, that you bump the greens up a little bit over the existing FG.
FGX.
FGX.
So FGX originally, the as many guys really liked FG, and let me tell you, FG was kind of a slow burn. You know, when it first came out, it was a little less received, but as it was out in the industry, it built up a following. And let me tell you, when we had finally decided what we were going to do, where we wanted to kind of take this new line of camo, the Evolution, man, when we freaking retired a couple of those patterns, there was some pushback. There was some pushbacks. A lot of guys really liked FG, but the thing was, it was a little bit more of an intermediate pattern. It had a lot of brown, light brown green in it. More of a brown, you know. So that was, as the FGX came out, we wanted more of a true, really rich green tropical uniform. That's why it evolved.
Yeah,
you know?
man.
So it didn't, and like I said, that's one of your favorite patterns, the one that you liked. And it was surprising even when you and I started talking, and we started probably, I think, in 2011.
Yeah.
No, it was
2011,
later than that.
2012.
It was 15. I'm sorry, 15. When we started coming out with the X line,
Oh, yeah.
and then we started putting the information out. Hey, you know, these patterns are getting ready to retire. You know, and we started putting out sequentially the new patterns, IX, you know, the LE, the FGX, AUX. They come out each year, and we kind of tried to give people, manufacturers, some time to absorb the fact that, hey, these fabrics are no longer going to be available. It is going to morph into these new patterns.
Yeah, new
I think
patterns.
that also kind of got made a little bit worse too by the fact that because people may not have been ordering as many pieces in FG just because it wasn't quite as well known of a color as, say, you know, someone ordering black or coyote brown or, you know, some regular tan or even like multicam or whatever,
Right.
is that because people had so much back stock of fabric, obviously it's natural to want to use up what they've got before they go buying something else. So that probably didn't help the situation very much, because I approached a couple of companies that I work with on a regular basis about, hey, you know, we want to have some Peltor wraps made in A-TACS FG. And I had to hear from them. They're like, oh, well, I can't get A-TACS FG anymore. And I'm like, why? Why? Like, no, don't tell me that. Like, what do you mean? And then they had to explain to me. And then when I talked to you guys, that kind of made that go full circle. And I realized, oh, well, yeah, guys like Cover King, who did my seat covers, might have had a good bit of that fabric laying around, because it takes a lot of fabric
Yeah.
to make seat covers.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
That's for sure. That's one of the things. One of the things that we really did, and both Phil and I talked about this a lot. Innovations, veteran-owned small businesses, man. So many guys, the war fighters are coming back, and they know. Guys that used it are saying, hey, I want to make a better backpack. I want to make a better, you know, a uniform, something more comfortable. The innovation that has happened over this GWAT time period has just catapulted things forward. And one of the things that we wanted to do here in A-TACS was be able to facilitate helping along. You know, A-TACS has been around 15 years. So, I mean, some of these new guys have been around 2, 3, 4 years, and they coming up with these new ideas. Hey, I want to build this or that, is trying to help them as much as we can bring those veteran small businesses along. Say, hey, we do cut goods. We can get you small quantities, because minimum order quantities from some of these factories,
Yeah.
a lot of guys, just like you mentioned, you can't go into a small business, hey, I need 3,000 yards of fabric, you know. I mean, that stuff could or could not be sitting around for a while, but if we can help them start out and get some of the innovative small businesses going, that's been nice to be able to do that.
A group that comes to mind immediately is Tactical Tailor.
Yeah.
I really love their work. I love their gear. Some of my favorite gear is Tactical Tailor. Good example.
I appreciate you guys breaking the mold of doing a modular system, because for the longest time it's been ingrained that everything has to match. So
Yeah.
you'll see guys, not being in full kit because they're worried that someone's going to call them out about not having matching gear. Like, I can't believe you wore those pants with a molly pack that doesn't match. What?
Yeah.
You can't afford the molly pack, so they just don't wear it. They rather not wear it at all, and I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
And I think that with the experience that a lot of the soft guys are bringing back, it's showing. Like, that's actually the way that it works. Like, you don't want to be one big matching blob. You want to break up that silhouette, and I think it's great. I mean, I really appreciate it.
Well, we feel like a lot of the innovation in the industry comes from these small veteran-owned businesses. I mean, these guys like yourselves get out and they have an idea, right, for something that would be a smart solution. They were deployed and they just couldn't get this piece of kit to work the way they wanted it to. So, dang it, they go home and they sew it up and they prototype it out. But they can't go and afford 3,000 yards of fabric because, again, that goes back to the problem with the factories. The factories that are out there, they're so few because so much of that labor has gone. They've retrained elsewhere. They've gone into automotive or they've gone other places, so it's leaving nobody that knows how to run fabric in this country anymore. They're very few. And that's not getting passed on to anybody else. So these factories, the few that are there, got to sell large numbers of fabric to survive. And that doesn't help the industry then. So somebody has to take it on the chin a little bit and, be able to take fabric in and then outsource small amounts. It helps fuel this innovation and these new products that come out.
Awesome.
It's certainly unfortunate that it's happened that way with American industry, and not just that subset of our industry, but American goods in general, right? I mean, think about the megalodon that used to be Detroit, Michigan, and the automotive industry. I mean, look at the steel mills and the automotive, all that industry. And man, we were just really killing it, making all kind of stuff. And Made in America was this huge, prideful thing we really loved, right? And it's just so weird how a lot of things we've almost been sort of forced, to rely on overseas manufacturing.
That's a great point, man. God, that's a great point. And I'll tell you, to caveat on that, and I'll tell you right now, the only good thing that all of this stress over this COVID-19 thing has done has pointed out to a lot of our politicians that we need to bring our manufacturing home. It may be a little more expensive for a while until people tool up and get all these little factories going in these small towns and bring jobs back, get our textiles back here to where we can produce something of quality, pass on some of these job skills. It's amazing when you go to a factory and the colorists, it's like the guy's old and it's like, who are you teaching what you know? Who when you're gone, who's going to know how to do this?
There's nobody.
If there's anything that come out of all this quarantining, I hope that we get a politician continuing in the office that will say, that's it. We are going to bring this manufacturing back. Because I'll tell you, coming from being a 25-year veteran, end user, coming out here and working in this industry like a lot of veterans, when it's very sobering when you figure out, wow, how difficult it is to get anything done and be able to put a Made in the USA stamp on it.
Total Made in the USA. I mean,
Totally.
There's so many manufacturers out there, like the biggest ones in the tactical industry. They outsource everywhere.
They'll do assembled in the U.S. It's like the final assembly, and I mean, just to show you, they'll have a tumbler, and they consider putting the top onto the tumbler as final assembly.
Yeah.
So it's crazy that they can still market that as it's
It
assembled
is.
in the U.S. and all they did was just put a plastic top on a tumbler that was made overseas, and they're like, hey, we get fair game. And unfortunately, I agree with you. I will say that at Ballistic Ink, we use only USA-made T-shirts and hoodies, and the quality is better. They cost more, significantly more, but the amount of defects that we run into compared to imported shirts are huge. So we have almost no defect shirts when we receive them in, and we're checking the shirts. The sewing is impeccable. It's just a better quality made item,
Right.
and they do cost more. But that's the burden. That's our burden to bear as retailers.
That's putting in money in some U.S.
Right.
family's home.
Correct.
You know,
Yeah.
even though it's a couple of dollars more, bite the bullet and make it U.S. made.
Right.
And I tell you, working with Phil and doing what we're trying to get done on a daily basis kind of had me starting to say, you got to realize we're a global economy. These things, you can't get them here. You can only get them over here, But again, I go back to it. I hope that this may be a turning point where we start realizing we got to have more of this here, better quality, employing Americans and having U.S. made products of some quality.
I hope so as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a time when we were really sure about things in this country, right? I mean, look at the Wright brothers. I mean, they made something fly. Everybody told them it was crazy. What did they do? They made the first airplane.
That's right.
Okay, look at the assembly line. Henry Ford, that whole thing. Standardized parts, that came from here. All these things that the modern age, we marvel at these technical wonders that we've come up with.
The
And a
iPhone.
lot of them, it's due to American ingenuity. And I think it's important that we bring that drive and hunger for ingenuity back to our country. We need to be looked at as a global power that is looked at for our expertise and having skilled craftsmen and people that can make things, right? Whether it's carpentry or whether it's sewing together a piece of kit or whatever it might be. We need to be craftsmen in everything that we do, no matter what that might be. And our art form can be anything we want, whether it's making warfare or whether it's making a piece of kit. Whatever we do as Americans, we're going to do it the best.
But that's,
and that needs to come back to our, the way we do things.
well, that really comes from pride, pride and innovation. That you create something, you bring something new into the, into the ethos and the environment that wasn't there before. And I don't know how much that mindset is part of this country's makeup today. It seems like to some degree a lot of that's devolved. There doesn't seem to be as much of that will to innovate or will something into existence that's out there.
You know what it is? It's complacency. People are too complacent. They're too comfortable, and they get complacent, and they think, oh, I can just go to the grocery store and get my food. I can do this. I can do that. I can order on Amazon and have it in 3 days. They're not in the mindset of, hey, I've got to survive, right? That survival instinct has gotten away from us. Whereby early on, I'm sure Henry Ford or the Wright brothers or whoever else or Thomas Edison or any of those guys, right, eventually at one point had to look at their wife that evening and go, well, honey, I've got to figure this out because if not, we're not going to be able to make our mortgage payment next month. We have to take the risk. I've dumped everything I've got into this, and it's put up or shut up, and it's make it or break it.
Yeah.
Everyone had to have that talk no matter who they are at some
right.
point.
Yeah.
Well,
And that's a problem. Not enough people have had to have that talk to realize that, hey, I've got to put up. I've got to make this happen.
Too many conveniences.
Well, and that and a lack of just grit. I think with veterans, it's something that's second nature because we've all been pushed to a point that you always had to go further. Whether you've hit a point where you said, I can't go anymore, but you really didn't have a choice. So your brain said no, but you either had someone on your team saying, hey, you have to go, you have guys depending on you, or just being pushed to your limit and being able to break through that barrier and have that grit just continue to go follows you through your entire life. And that's just something that a lot of people these days don't have. They've never experienced that limit. They've never hit the wall. Everything has been provided to them or it's been extremely easy to get. So when it comes to a point where they say, well, I can just get it, I get it from Amazon because it's easy. Even though it might be more expensive. Amazon isn't always the most least expensive. It's just the easiest.
Yeah, but what's the effect of that?
Yeah.
When you make that purchase, you're taking money out of the hand of a retailer and a single mom that's working to support her kids.
100% agree. I 100%
There
agree.
may be a worker in the fulfillment center somewhere that's pulling that, but you don't know where that fulfillment center is in some cases, and what's behind that. I mean,
Right.
and cheaper's not, to your point earlier, cheaper's not always better. I mean, you're making an investment in your country and the well-being of the people around you. That mentality's kind of gone,
Yeah.
right? Because we become like a society of self. It's all about self.
Right. You don't have the will to contribute to your local economy. It's no longer You used to want to be a part of your local community and say, hey, I'm going to contribute, I'm going to shop in my community, and so I'm going to spend my money. And now it's turned into, I'm going to shop out of my community, and all that money is leaving and not coming back. And you see a lot of the smaller retailers, that's affecting a lot of the smaller retailers.
Absolutely. Well, I definitely want to thank you guys for being on our podcast today. We're probably getting kind of close to about the time frame. I will say I hope to see like grit and tenacity return to American spirit, because it just seems like we've lost our way.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, and just because you're having a nightmare in your sleep doesn't mean that when you wake up you have to have that nightmare forever. And I think that it's really important that Americans wake up and understand that, you know, that there not only is a global picture, as we, you know, made mention of that earlier, but there's a much more personal picture that we have to look at in terms of what our role in society has to be and what innovations that we're going to try to leave for the people that are going to come after we're here. You know, what are you going to pass down? What skill set? What are you going to teach somebody? Like, that should always be in the back of your mind, that as you are living vicariously through what you do and loving what you do, you're also training your replacement. We have to always, you know, be willing and ready to train the people that are going to replace us. Because if you're not training the people that are supposed to replace you, where are you going? You can't, you know, you can't promote yourself until you can replace yourself. So you've got to be able to eventually turn the keys over. And without getting too far down this rabbit hole before we leave today, it's also what worries me so much about these career politicians is they clearly have no concern over who's coming next.
Yes.
It's the me show. Mm-hmm. America has become the me show. It's all about me, my self-serving interests, me, my, now. I demand this now.
Yes.
It's not, you know, am I willing to work for it, or am I willing to consider what other people's needs might be? So that's a very scary thing, especially in politics. We should really be pushing for term limits.
Absolutely.
And make these people work for their reelection, make these people train and work towards getting the next people in there.
Yes.
So
Agree
on that
agree
note.
100%, man. Agree 100%.
Is there anything you guys like to put out? Where can folks find you? Because you guys have a podcast of your own as well.
Yep. We actually
what's the name of that podcast?
We do a team room talk. As you know, we're here with you guys today, being able to join up with your podcast. We typically do a podcast, you know, all of the stuff A-TACS that you can find. We do all the standard, you know, social medias, our website, atacs.com, you know, all of the substrates that we have. We have some great brand partners in Diversitex and Image360 and Murdoch Webbing and, you know, Burley Man Tactical. I'll miss some there because, I mean, there's probably 18, 20 suppliers, but our brand partners, we really want to say thanks to all of our brand partners. What we've spent probably the better part of the last 4 years really trying to partner with great companies. Veteran-owned companies are a big part of what we do. We like being involved with those guys. And like I said, you can find almost everything that we're doing on one of the social medias, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, you know, so on and so forth.
All the usual stuff. Plus, we want to thank, I mean, God, people like yourself, you know, that supported us over the years. And, I mean, we got some guys downrange now wearing our stuff. And,
Nice.
you know, we're all about that, too. So, you know, thanks to them. And so we do our part from this end to continue to innovate and keep everybody covered.
Nice.
Matt, you got anything before we go?
Nope, that is it, guys.
All right. Well, look, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm looking at you at the camera over there. Thank you guys for watching. Let us know if you want us to share more podcasts here on the YouTube channel. You're probably watching on IraqVeteran 8888. For those of you that are listening on the podcast, thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed today's talk. And if there's some certain guests that you would love to, you know, for us to have on the podcast or on the channel, let us know. We'll try to accommodate that. So this has been A-TACS. Really cool talk. I'm gonna go hide in the woods now. We'll see about that.
Stay hidden.
I like it.
All right, guys. Have a good one. We'll see y'all soon.
If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button, and while you have a chance, stop by and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and make sure that you ring that notification bell